Okay, welcome to Psych 236, Developmental Psychology. Today we're talking about late adulthood. So the period of age between, well, 65 and onward, okay? And we're talking about psychosocial development. So the more psychological stuff, more social stuff. So let's just get right to it. All right, let's talk about activities in late adulthood, okay? One of those things that's very important to late adulthood is working, okay? Now, people who are 65 and older, a lot of them are actually retired, okay? But some people keep working. And does that have benefits? Okay, so working. So the activities of older people they can be intense and varied. They can involve work. Some people continue working, and some people are active in other words, socially and volunteer work. We'll talk about some of those things. But about when it comes to working in general, you can see the graph there, the percentage of elders 65 to 100 who are employed, okay? And you can see that recently, there's more men and women who have decided to keep working after age 65, probably because things have gotten more expensive. Okay, it's just things are a lot more expensive now, especially in California. Housing, electricity, gas, everything costs more. Years go by and everything gets more and more expensive. Okay, so more people have decided to work longer, and you can see that there is a greater percentage of males who decide to keep working after 65 than females. But you can see that, less than a quarter of people are working, of males after age 65. And only about 15% or so of women are working after age 65. So most people are already retired by then, okay? There are psychological benefits to work, okay? Work helps you, for instance, maintain that, not just that income, but that sense of status, that sense of, camaraderie with your, if you have friends at work or the other people at work. There's lots of things that work actually does for us, okay? Helps us maintain social support, status. It boosts our self-esteem, makes us feel good about ourselves. But those benefits of work can also be obtained through volunteer work. You don't actually have to work, you can volunteer. And if you volunteer, that means you can do so on your schedule. You can decide when to volunteer and when not to. So you're not on anybody's schedule. And that can also give you the benefits of work, where you feel like, that you are connected to people, you feel like you mean something, and you feel like you're worth something. For many people, employment allows generativity. Remember, we talked about with respect to, Erickson's theory, that work allows you to generate something of value, to feel like you're being productive. But most people are not working when they're 65 and older. I don't plan to be working when I'm 65. I plan to retire like at 64. Okay, but it has benefits there are many benefits to working, not the least of which is income. Okay, retirement. So most people will be retired around this time. But many adults continue to work, like I said, because of money, because of social recognition, because their work is fulfilling to them and they love what they do and they want to keep doing it. It was once believed that older adults were healthier and happier when they were employed. We once believed that it was basically, that's why, people, continued working, that work helped you stay healthy. It helped you stay happier, right? And it can do that. But in reality, people continue working for many reasons, often because they can't afford to retire. They don't have much savings or much of a pension. Sometimes it's, they continue working just because, they feel like they don't have much else to do. Okay. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're healthier. It doesn't mean that you are happier or healthier. But it is true that a lot of people do retire because they're not healthy anymore, because they can't keep working. A lot of people would like to keep working, but feel they can't cope anymore. That they get too tired, or the stress is not worth it. And like, I don't know if I said this before, but for most Americans, their jobs are just a way to get a paycheck. Okay. Most people, their job doesn't fulfill their identity, doesn't complete them. For some people it does. Some people really love what they do. But there's a variety of reasons why people keep working and why they decide to retire. It was also once believed that unemployment and retirement led to illness and death, right? That if you that if you retire, it just means you're going to get sick and die. Okay. There is some evidence that suggests that when people do retire, yes, that they, you know, that's some of them often do because they are frail and older, and, you know, and they kind of have to, they can't keep working because of their health. But a lot of people are also very happy and very healthy even after that, and will live, you know, decades beyond that. So it's a bit more complicated than that. And we know that nowadays. Activities of late adulthood, other things like volunteer work. There's a lot of people decide to volunteer. Okay. And you can see on the graph there, the percentage of people who volunteer, those that are 16 to 24, you know, a little bit of more than 20%, you know, same thing with those that are 25 to 34, 35 to 44. That seems to be the highest among people, those who volunteer, 45, 54. And then it's also high among people who are 65 and older, at least higher than it is when you were younger. So there's a good chunk of people who volunteer. Okay. And probably the reason why volunteer work is higher when you're in your 30s and 40s and early 50s is probably not really work, but you volunteer. It's probably because you have kids. And so you volunteer, you know, to be the coach for this or that, or you volunteer for this at the school or whatever. That might be the reason for it. But a very important part of being older and being in that later age group and being retired is staying active. And a lot of people do that with volunteering. Okay. Volunteer work is linked to generativity. You're still producing something of value. You're still helping out, right? Maintaining social connections. You get to see people, you get to make friends, right? People feel less depressed when they're active, when they're connected socially, when they're doing something, and they also feel healthier. Okay. Volunteer work may actually reduce the death rate according to some research. It helps you stay active, both physically and mentally. It may actually be good for your health. You don't have to continue working at the job that you're doing, especially if you don't like it when you're older. But once you retire, you don't just want to sit there on a rocking chair, right? Or sit there on a recliner and watch TV all day long, every day. You want to be active. You want to do things. And some people do that with volunteer work. It really does a lot for people. It helps you feel good about what you're doing. It helps you keep active, helps you maintain relationships and find relationships, right? And volunteer is increased by knowing someone else who volunteers. If you know someone else who's doing things, helping out, right, then they tell you about it, and then you're more likely to get involved. It's also increased by encouragement, encouraging people to volunteer, right? And by suggestions for volunteering, just telling people that it's a good thing to do. A lot of older people actually help out a lot and volunteer. And often actually because they have the time. They're retired and their kids are grown up. And what are you going to do with yourself? You're just going to watch TV all day long, or are you actually going to do something for your community? You're going to do something to help out. There's many things you can do, depending on, you know, the amount of money you have and all that stuff. If you're wealthy, you can travel and do lots of things. If you're not so wealthy, you can, you know, volunteer, maintain social relationships. You can also exercise. You can do all sorts of things. And you're going to have plenty of time when you're older. Assuming you're not, you know, help raising somebody else's kids. You're a grandparent raising, you know, your own children's kids because they can't do it or something like that. We'll talk about that in a moment. Other activities in late adulthood, home sweet home. Well, what that means is that the favorite activity of the elderly, of people who are older, is caring for their own homes and taking care of their own needs, right? Maintaining their own homes, keeping them clean, you know, taking care of the garden, things like that. You know, looking after themselves, you know, and taking over the homes. Older people love to do that. And like I said, they have a lot more time. So they like to do those things to keep their home nice and take care of themselves and their home, basically. Take care of each other, you know, if you have a spouse. You know, I'm nowhere near retirement yet. And I can tell you right now, taking care of the home and doing the yard and all that stuff, I find it a burden. I find it a chore. I wish I didn't have to do that. Okay. I just don't want to do that. I have plenty of other things to do because I'm raising kids and I'm going to work. But when I'm retired, I'm probably going to find the same thing. I'm probably going to take pleasure in those things because what else is there to do, right? You might as well have pride in what you have and what you care for. Aging in place. Speaking of home sweet home, most adults prefer to stay in their own homes, and most of them do, right? They want to stay in their own home. They want to stay there. They want to, you know, get older there. and they want to make the adjustments, you know, as their health fades, but they want to stay in their homes. They don't want to have to go and move in with their kids, right? Because they can't take care of themselves. They don't want to be sent off to some retirement home. Most of them don't want to do that. Most of them want to stay in their own homes, and they want to age there. They want to, you know, live the rest of their lives there. Okay. A lot of them actually want to die there too. They don't even want to die in the hospital. In some hospitals and places, they give you a choice, right? When you know your time is near and there's nothing they can do for you, they tell you, well, okay, do you want to stay here? Do you want to, you know, go back home and, you know, pass there, you know? Most of them want to be in their own homes. That's what they want. That's where they feel, you know, comforted. That's where they have all those memories, being around the things they recognize, the things that they grew up seeing, right? The place where their kids grew up. That's very comforting to them. And it also helps with memory and all sorts of things, right? When they have all these things that remind them of their life, as opposed to being sent off to some, you know, some home for the elderly. And we'll talk about that, by the way. And it's not like you think, okay? The interruption of those social connections, especially harmful to women and those people who are very frail. You know, when you don't get to age in the home, in your own home, what happens is, you know, if you get sent somewhere else, or you end up moving because, you know, somebody needs to take care of you, that disrupts a lot of your connections among your friends and your neighbors and all that stuff. And it's very harmful to the elderly, especially women. You know, women really like to socialize, right? More than men. And those who are very frail, you know, in memory and physically, it's very helpful for them to have those connections and visit people and walk to somebody's house or something like that. It can be very harmful, right? Most elderly people want to stay in their own homes and they want to age there. They want to live the rest of their lives there. And by the way, if you want to do that, it's useful that you have a certain kind of home, okay? Preferably a one-story home, by the way, that you can age in. Not some home where you have to walk several flights of stairs, or in some building or something like that. Sure, that'll help you stay healthy to go up and down stairs. But as you get older and you get frail, you know, and you may not be able to make it up those stairs. If you get old enough, you will have trouble. Or if you get sick or you're ill or whatever it is, you might not be able to make it up those stairs, especially if you smoke, by the way. My mom, my wife's elderly mother had those problems when she was older. She actually lived in a townhome, and she couldn't make it up the stairs anymore. It was 2 stories. She couldn't make it up the stairs. So she had to stay on the bottom floor. She would sleep on the couch, and there was a bathroom there, and she would eat there. She couldn't make it up to the bedrooms anymore. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs. She couldn't make it up there anymore. There are ways around that, of course, but you have to think about that as you're getting older. What happens if you fall down the stairs, right? It's better to have a 1-story home. And by the way, 1-story homes are more expensive. And not just for that reason, it's because of many things. They have a greater footprint and bigger roof and things like that than a 1-story home. 2-story homes. 2-story homes and above are cheaper. And it's because they cost less to build. But anyway, you need to think about those things, right? When you are getting older and where you want to spend the last years of your life, right? Is that suitable for you? Right? Having a 1-story home is beneficial, okay? That's what I have right now, and if I have to, I'll stay here. But I'm thinking about moving in the future, moving to a place with a better climate, okay? A place that's not so cold, not so windy, not so hot, okay? Other activities in late adulthood, there's something called a naturally occurring retirement community, a NORC, okay? It's a neighborhood. It's a neighborhood or a apartment where people have been there for a long time. They've moved there and they have aged in place. So a neighborhood or apartment complex whose population is mostly older people who have moved there as younger adults, and they just stayed there. They never left, and they all got older together. An important reason for both aging in place and naturally occurring retirement communities is the social convoy, just having those who basically are your age, that you age with, right? This is the result of years of close relationships. If you live in a community like that, that's a very good thing. Where a lot of people were there, they moved there, and they raised children there, and they just stayed there, and they got older together, and they're friends, they're neighbors. It's a very good thing to have. I'm not that sociable, so I don't really have that. Okay, I stay away from my neighbors. I like my privacy. I do know them, but I like my privacy. Okay. As a matter of fact, where I live, it's a bunch of old people already. Okay, elderly people, already retired, but I'm not at that age already. Other things that are important for late adulthood: religious involvement correlates with physiological and emotional health. If you are religious, if God means something to you, it's a good idea to still, be involved with that, right? To go to church and to be, to still continue your faith, so to speak, and continue to be involved with that. Religious prohibitions are actually encourage good habits. If you do go to church and you are religious and you believe in God or whatever God it is that you believe in, it's actually a good thing for people when they're older. It makes them feel better. It's better for them to be able to face the future and the possibility of dying, but also helps them maintain relationships. And also, a lot of the things that are not acceptable from the point of view of the religion are actually good for people. They tell you not to drink too much, not to sleep around, not to do lots of things. And if you follow a lot of their guidelines, it's actually good for you when you're older, right? They encourage good habits. Faith communities also promote caring relationships, right? You make friends, you get along with people, you help each other out, right? Beliefs give meaning to life and death, right? It makes you feel better, because those are all things you have to think about. And those are things that provide meaning, right? Your religion, your church, they help you understand those things, give you a sense of purpose and a sense of where you're going, so to speak, if you believe in such a thing. Religious identity and institutions are important for older members of minority groups, especially, right? Especially if you're, if you're in the minority, right? If you're not the majority, right? If you're Black or Latino, it's a very, very helpful thing to stay involved with your church and things like that when you're older. It makes you feel better, gives you the sense of connection, lots of things that it does for you. It's good for everybody. It's especially good for people who are minority, because remember, people who are minorities, they face a different situation with the discrimination, the racism, and all the other difficulties. When you're not in the majority, you don't have a lot of the benefits that the majority has. I know some people want to believe that it's the same, that it's a bunch of nonsense, that white people have it the same as Black people and Latino people, but it's not true. It is much harder. If you live in a white country, right, and you are Latino or Black or whatever it is, and it really helps to have that religious faith, to be a part of a church that makes you feel connected, makes you feel protected, that gives you, strength and things like that. And we talked about that, how it's especially important even when you're younger for those who are African Americans. Okay, it's a very good thing to have, especially when you're older. Although not everybody, is religious. Okay, not everybody belongs to a church. Other activities, physical activity. I've said this before, but here it is, right? It's very, not physical activity. I almost got ahead of myself. Political activity. Yes, the elderly can be very active politically. Okay, about 2% of those that are 65 and older volunteer in political campaigns. They volunteer, they help out, elect this person or that person, this governor, this senator, or this president. They get involved, okay? About 7% of them actually volunteer for any political, civic, international, or professional group. A lot of them volunteer for other things. They're very active, the elderly, about 7% of them. Now, there's probably a smaller percentage in people of other ages. But those that are elderly care a lot about their rights. They care a lot about who gets elected and, who should be in office. They care a lot about that stuff, because it affects them a lot, especially when they start, people start talking about that, because there's a budget deficit, that we got to cut Medicare, cut this, and we got to change healthcare. They get very upset about that stuff because it affects them directly. Healthcare is very important for them. So is Social Security. And Medicare and lots of different things. And when they start seeing these politicians talking about making changes to this and that, they get very upset. They don't want their benefits cut. They want their benefits increased. So they're a very important group politically, a very powerful group politically. Remember, they also control a lot of money. These elderly people, a lot of them have money because they've worked many years, and they can be active politically and have, and have a lot of clout, so to speak. More than any other age group, they write letters to the representatives, telling them how they feel and what they want, right? They identify with a political party. Younger people don't identify so strongly with a political party. A lot of young people, like especially you guys, a lot of you don't give a damn about one political party or another. Or you say that maybe you believe more in this or that, but you don't vote, or you don't really do much, okay? You don't have a good sense of of a political identity. The older people, they've been around for a long time. They know exactly which side they believe in and which side they don't. Okay. So they identify more strongly with that. They're more likely to vote. They vote in very high numbers. Younger people, not as much. Okay. And they stay current with the news. They have a lot of time on their hands. So they're aware of what's going on. Okay. They're a very important group politically. There's talk about how people get older and they may not drive as well, and they may be more likely to get into accidents. That's not really true, because elderly people kind of drive more slowly. They've talked in several places. The lawmakers have talked about, basically making it so that when you're above a certain age, like maybe above 65, that you have to come in and take a driving test like you did before, to prove you can still drive safely. Sounds logical, sounds reasonable, but you try telling that to the people of that age group, to the elderly, and they're gonna fight you for it. And they have never been able to make those changes, because these people who are 65 and older, they will make sure that doesn't happen. They vote against it, or they basically vote out whoever was talking about that stuff. They're a very powerful group. Okay, trust me, those older people control, and not all older people are middle class or poor. A lot of them have money. They control lots of money, lots of influence. They have status, a lot of them, and they're very active politically. And many times they get their way. I'm not saying they shouldn't. Friends and relatives, it's very important to stay socially connected when you're older, but long-term partnerships, spouses in strong marriages provide a buffer against old age problems and protect health. It's good to have a relationship when you're older, to still have your spouse, your marriage partner, right? It's someone who can protect you, take care of each other, you protect each other. One of you gets sick, the other person helps out, right? It helps protect you from illness, but also your health, encouraging better health habits, encouraging each other to stay active, feeling loved. It keeps you psychologically healthy as well. It's good to have someone. Okay. If you're alone, you're more likely to feel lonely and miserable and depressed, and more likely to eat out and eat junk food and not take very good care of yourself. When you have someone to stay strong for, someone to stay healthy for, right? Then you're more likely to stay healthy. An exceedingly positive spouse portrayal facilitates discussion rather than arguments, and integration rather than domination. What that means is that having someone who's positive, someone who loves you, who's nice to you, all that stuff, it helps you get along better. It helps you have more discussions. You're going to have a lot of time on your hands when you're older and you're both retired, right? To talk about things, to get along, right? It's good to have somebody who's positive, someone you get along with. Not someone who's going to argue with you and just dominate you and tell you what to do, right? You have to think about that, right? What kind of spouse do you have? Luckily, hopefully, when you get older, you'll learn, to live with each other and to get along better. Probably, after the kids grow up, research shows that once the kids are grown up and out of the house, couples get along better. You fight a lot about kids and related things. Once they're gone and out of the house, you're retired. Hopefully you're not stressed about work and income and things like that. The kids aren't there anymore. Not that you don't love them, but they're not there anymore, driving you crazy all the time. So things get better, and all of a sudden you feel that you get along better. That's what happens, right? If you can hang on, right? Not that you always should hang on, though. Sometimes you're better off leaving, okay? But together, couples achieve selective optimization and compensation. Together, they help each other out. They help, maximize their potential as far as their lifestyle and what they can do together, and compensate for difficulties with walking or with eyesight. They encourage each other. They help each other. And that's what they do. It's a good thing to have. But there are plenty of people who live alone, by the way. We'll talk about that. A lifetime of shared experiences, just some pictures here and some captions, right? You have the elderly couple on the left, that have been together for a long time, and you can see they still love each other, right? And then the couple on the right, been celebrating 50 years, right, together, right? And then there's a bunch of newly married couples in the background there, right? It's good if you have that when you're older. Not everybody does, though. I feel like I don't get along with my wife already. And hopefully we'll get along better when we're older, assuming we're still together. The big test is when the kids grow up and the kids are out of the house, right? If we don't get along then, it's like, why the hell are we together? You know, it's like right now I understand it's hard. We're working, raising these kids. We have a special needs kid. But if in the future the kids are grown up and like we still don't get along, it's like, why the hell? It's like, I'm out of here, right? That kind of stuff, right? Hopefully it'll get better and we'll get along, right? But right now we're not, okay? It's hard. Friends and relatives, more about this. Intergenerational relationships. Yeah, there is, you know, keeping the family close, right? The different generations, you know, the grandparents and the grandchildren. You know, there could be 3-4 generations, right? Familism prompts family caregiving among all groups. If you have this this belief in familism, that you believe in having a tight, close family, tight-knit family, that kind of stuff, then you're more likely to help each other out and stay together. That's something that's common among a lot of Latinos who are more collectivist. I grew up in that kind of situation where we all got together, the aunts, the uncles, the grandparents, and the children were there. And it was a great thing growing up. My cousins were always around. Now that we're older, I think we believe less in that. We're all here and there, and we don't get together that much. And it's kind of changing. We're becoming more individualistic, but it's good to have that kind of belief in having a close-knit family, not just your immediate family, but also your extended family. Filial responsibility, feeling responsible for those that are related to you. That's what that means. Filial affiliation, those you associate with, right? Feeling responsible varies by culture and worldwide. Like I said, some cultures are just more collectivist than others, feel more responsible for their aging parents and want to keep the family, you know, not just the immediate, but the extended family together and close. Other cultures, you know, the US and Europe, other cultures, more individualistic, and everyone's all over the country, all over the place, don't see each other that much. My wife's family, you know, it's like she saw her mom like every 5 years on a holiday here and there. Her dad's only been to her house like twice, you know, and that's what happens to a lot of people when their children grow up and they leave and they don't really stay in touch. They do stay in touch, but they don't see each other that much anymore. Everyone's in a different state, in different places, you know, and some other cultures are different. Asian people, Latinos, you know, are different. We like to stay closer to each other, but even our cultures are changing and we're becoming more individualistic as well. My family, we grew up that way, and now everybody's all over the country. We have people in Vegas, we have people in Pennsylvania, people in Atlanta. Now they're moving everywhere, and we kind of have lost that. Don't see each other that much anymore. Okay, but it's good to have that nice relationship and to stay involved with each other. Conflict may be more frequent in emotionally close relationships than in distant ones. Yeah, when you're all close together and you stay in touch and you live near each other, you're more likely to have problems. Yes, that is the truth. The truth. I remember seeing that growing up. I remember seeing my uncles get into fights with one another, right? They got drunk, and then before you know it, they were, you know, they were, you know, getting into fist fights. I remember seeing them rolling around the dirt fighting. That's what happens when you stay close together, right? And you're involved more with each other. You fight more. Okay, it's not always that bad, but yeah, I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. Bunch of everyone, all the males in my family are a bunch of alcoholics, all getting drunk. And remember when they were younger and drunk, and I was just a little kid. I remember all the fights and all the arguments, all that stuff. We were very involved with each other, but it also means more, you know, more fights. But we also care a lot about each other. Developmental age may impact a degree of ambivalence as well. It has to do also with your age, right? When you're young, you need your parents a lot and you want them there. When you're a teenager, it's like you'd rather be with your friends. And then you're raising your own kids. You want to be with your kids and you want to raise them. Although your aging parents want to see you more often, you don't see them that much. And then when you're older, you realize the importance of staying together, of having those relationships. And then when you're the one who's elderly, right? And you realize how, you know, how much you need other people and how much you miss other people, you know, you may realize that too late. And by then, maybe your parents are gone, right? Because you're the one who's elderly now. They're long gone, so to speak. And you realize how important that is to stay in touch with your kids, right? And to raise them a certain way so they stay in touch with each other. We need to value that. And I say that right now as, you know, as I myself, right, am raising my kids with my wife. And, you know, I see my mother not too often, right? But I do talk to her more frequently. But need to make the effort to stay in touch and to see your loved ones more often, because they're going to get old, they're going to die, and so are you. And when you're old, you're going to realize that, I'm getting a little emotional, but you're going to realize what you could have had, right? Or what you missed the most, right? Those things are important. And sometimes we realize that too late. But even when we do realize it, we don't practice it. I'm aware of this, and I still don't see my family, my extended family, and even my mom and all those people as much as I should. Right now, there's a good reason for not doing so, by the way, but I'm going to make an effort, right? That's why I say, but then we get busy and we don't do it, okay? Other things, friends and relatives. Extensive research has found that relationships between parents and adult children are affected by many factors. How well do parents, get along, with their, grandparents, or the parents with their adult children, so to speak. And also with their grandkids. Assistance arises from the need or the ability to provide. Okay. Sometimes, grandparents are, that's what we're talking about here, are more involved because they are needed. Sometimes you need their help, and they're very involved because of that. When you have this, multiple generations here that are more involved, or the ability to provide help, right? Are they nearby? Can they help? If they're more nearby, they're more likely to be around, right? You're more likely to, you raising kids and then your parents helping you out or being involved, and then the children, right? You have 3 generations there. Frequency of contact is related to geographical proximity, not affection. How often you're going to stay in touch has more to do with how close they are, proximity, right? Whether they live nearby, not how much you care about them. You may love them a lot, but if they live 3,000 miles away, like in New York, you're not going to see them that much. You're not going to be that involved with them. And if they're nearby, like if they live around the block or something like that, even if you don't like each other that much, you're going to have a lot of contact because they're your parents, right? They're people who are related to you. The closer they are, the more contact you have. And like I said, collectivist cultures, they tend to move into a certain area and they tend to want to live near each other. All right, but that's kind of changing too. Love is influenced by the interaction remembered from childhood. If you remember your parents being very loving and nice to you, right, then you're more likely to have positive interactions with them when you're older and they're older, right? If you remember them being very mean and stuff like that, you may not want to be that involved with them. There are plenty of people who decide that they don't want to have anything to do with their parents. Their parents are really awful and bad, and now they're trying to raise their own kids, and they don't want them around. There's plenty of people like that. Not everyone was a good parent. Not everyone grew up in such a nice family. There's some very dysfunctional families, some very hurt feelings. A lot of bad stuff happened in a lot of families. Sons feel stronger obligation to stay in touch with their parents, but daughters feel stronger affection. Sons do it more like out of obligation, out of helping out, that they feel they should be involved. Daughters are more likely to do it because they feel a stronger emotional connection. So both are likely to stay involved, but women do it more out of love. Men do it more out of like, I need to take care of my parents, right? They need me, that kind of stuff. They're elderly and I need to help them out. So this gets us to grandparents. Speaking of, grandparents, right? Most 85% of people who are over age 65 are grandparents. About 85% of them are grandparents. There are some who don't become grandparents. They didn't have any kids, or they had kids and their kids didn't have kids. Okay. Factor is influencing the nature of the grandparent relationship, right? Grandparent-grandchild relationship, right? So you're going to be a grandparent, you're going to have a grandchild, right? What influences that? Well, one is personality, right? Are you a nice and caring person, or are you kind of mean and angry, right? That's going to affect with, the kind of relationship you're going to have with your grandkids, right? Ethnicity matters too. Like I said, some cultures are more collectivist and they believe in staying nearby and being more involved. National background matters. That goes along with ethnicity and things like that, right? Some people are more collectivist than others. Past family interactions. If you were very close in the past, you're more likely to be close in the future. If you weren't, then you probably are not going to be. Age and personality of the child also matters, right? When children are younger, that's when the grandparents want to see them more. When they're older, teenagers and stuff like that, and they seem to be kind of aloof and don't care so much about their family, right? Because they want to be with their friends. Grandparents are not as involved. Okay. But also the personality of the child. Some of them are nice and good kids. Some of them are a nightmare, and you don't want to be involved sometimes. There's a lot of variation. I've known about all of it. Okay. But it's been a lot of variation in my own family. So in the United States, contemporary grandparents fill one of four roles. There's four kinds of grandparents, okay, according to research. There are, and we'll define them. We'll define all of them. There's remote grandparents, companionate grandparents, involved grandparents, surrogate parents, also grandparents, but they're surrogate parents. In developed nations, most grandparents are companionate. Here in the U.S. and other nations that are developed economically, most grandparents are the kind that are surrogate, not surrogate, that are companionate grandparents, which I'll define in a moment. Surrogate parents are usually skip generation families. The surrogate parents those are the grandparents that are raising their children's children because their children couldn't or aren't around for some reason, right? That's a different kind of grandparent. But most of them are companionate. And we'll talk about what companionate means in a moment. So there's different kinds of grandparents. Some of them are remote grandparents. Remote grandparents were more common about 100 years ago. Back in the day, this was more common. Grandparents who live far away, basically, they're emotionally distant. They're not really too involved emotionally. They're emotionally distant, but esteemed. It's people who you respect and honor, and you obey them. They were usually people who lived far away, but they controlled the family business, the land, the wealth, okay? They're around, but you don't see them that much. They live far away, okay? Usually you have a matriarch, maybe a mother who kind of owns all the land and has most of the money or something like that, or a patriarch, a father that's like that, or a grandparent, right? And they maintain traditional values. They enforce rules on their children. They want their children, even though they're grown up, to behave a certain way and raise their kids a certain way and maintain certain values and traditions. And how can they get away with that? Because they have a lot of money and land. And if their children don't do what they want, they're going to write them off the will or not give them any land. That's how grandparents used to be a long time ago. They were more honored, more esteemed, and they controlled important things. Okay. I have a grandparent who kind of passed away. Actually, I had a grandparent who passed away a couple of years ago. He was kind of like that. Lived far away in El Salvador, another country. He has some land over there. And even though we don't really want that land because it's not worth anything, okay, it's in El Salvador and it's not even in a good part of town or anything like that, we still honored and obeyed and respected him. Not his own kids and his grandkids. He's like God or something to us. It's just like you don't question him. You honor and obey him. Okay, that kind of, not like really like God, but let's just say that you have to speak with them in a certain way. You have to honor them and respect them. And you don't see them that much, but you're supposed to respect them. Those are remote grandparents. There's also involved grandparents. Not the best situation, but involved grandparents are the ones that are active in day-to-day life of their children. They're very involved, right? They're helping. They're not necessarily the parents, but they'll help you raise the kids. They'll help you take care of them while you go to work, maybe provide, daycare and things like that. They live nearby. They provide a lot of care. They help you out a lot. It's rare today, except in immigrant families. It's not really rare. In immigrant families, Latinos, Black people, all that stuff, and people who are or especially Latinos who are immigrants, they still have a lot of that. Your grandparents are going to help you a lot with those kids. You got to go to school, you got to go to work, and they're there helping you out. All right. But sometimes they're involved for the wrong reasons. It's because you're basically, you all live together because it's expensive. So you live with your parents, right? And you have your own kids. And so you have children, you have parents, and then you have grandparents all living together, and they're too involved in your life, and your in-laws living there, and your in-laws and in Spanish, the suegro, la suegra stuff, and then metiches, and they're involved with each other and sticking their nose where it doesn't belong, and they don't mind their own business, that kind of stuff. There can be problems like that with involved grandparents. I know plenty of situations like that. Ideally, you want grandparents living in their own home, you in your own home, raising your kids, right? But sometimes they live with you and they're very involved, okay? Sometimes they live nearby and they're too involved and they cause trouble, okay? Not that they mean badly, but there's disagreements about stuff, okay? But often it can be a good thing. They help you out too. Companionate grandparents, that's most grandparents here in the US, okay? Companionate grandparents are independent. They live in their own home. They take care of themselves, right? Autonomous, take care of themselves, live in their own house, right? They entertain or spoil the children, but they don't discipline them. They come around once in a while. They don't really help you take care of the kids. They're not really there to, to punish them if they do something wrong. They just come around you know, during birthdays or holidays or every once in a while. And when they do, they have gifts, or they give your kids money, or they take them to the zoo or something like that. They're just there to entertain the kids and spoil them. That's what a lot of people in this country believe grandparents should be like. Your grandparents are there to spoil the grandchildren, not to discipline them, right? And most grandparents are like that here in the US. And by that, by most, I mean most white people, okay? But like I said, for immigrants, for Latinos, other people, it's different. The middle generation is a gatekeeper. Okay, so you have children, you have, you know, you raising kids, right? And then you have your own parents, grandparents, right? If you're in the middle generation, you're known as the gatekeeper. You decide as the middle generation how much child-grandparent contact occurs. You decide how much you want those grandparents around, right? How much they're gonna really help out with the kids, or how much they're involved with the kids, right? If you want, they may not have any contact at all. And you may not like your own parents, and you don't want anything to do with them. And they cannot just come around if you don't want them to, okay? Earlier relationships may provoke bitterness. Sometimes people didn't get along with their parents, and they don't want their parents around, you know, being involved with their own kids. They felt their parents were really bad. Maybe they were drug addicts or drunks or abusive or whatever it is, and they don't want them around. However, but people do change over time. These really mean parents that you've had may not be so mean anymore. They may not be such drunks anymore, or drug addicts, or whatever it is, or really abusive. They're older now. They're more frail. They may not be that way at all anymore. Intergenerational relationships promote well-being. It's good to have, you know, grandparents around. They do serve a purpose, even though you may not want them around. Family connections are pivotal for optimal growth. It's good to have those family connections. It's good to stay in touch with not just your immediate family, your extended family. It's a very good thing to have. And it's something that's kind of breaking down in our society. You know, if it's broken down a long time ago for, you know, for a lot of people, but even for those that are more collectivist, more family oriented, like Latinos, even that, it's breaking down, you know, but it's good to have that. But sometimes you grew up in very dysfunctional families and you don't want them around. Sometimes they're very bad people. But remember that they might have been bad people back then. That doesn't mean they're bad people today. Okay. My dad, for instance, like, he lives in another country. He lives in El Salvador. Okay. And if he lived here, I wouldn't want him around my kids. No way. According to what I've heard about my mom, I didn't really know him, but my dad was very abusive. He would beat my mom, and he cheated on her with many different women, has kids from a lot of different women with like at least 3 others. And he was so mean and so awful of a man that they all left him. And in the end, he ended up alone. And I visited him once in El Salvador. I wanted to know who my dad was because I didn't even know him when I was growing up. So I went, and I went with my mom, and I met him. And then after that, you know, we kept in touch. He gave me his number, stuff like that, and I gave him mine. And he just calls me up for money all the time, is what he does. He just wants more and more money, and I do help him out. Sometimes I get sick of him just asking me for money, though. He's not a nice man, okay? He doesn't really care about me. He just wants my money, so to speak. And I don't have a lot of money, but he's not a good man, okay? From what I've heard, and my uncles all hate him and stuff like that. I didn't really know him, but I can tell he's a very cold man that cares for the wrong things. And if he was here, I wouldn't really want him around that much. But I would respect him, but I wouldn't want him too involved with my kids, okay? He's just not a good man, all right? Let's talk about friendships. Friendships are very important for middle-aged adults and for people who are older, okay? There are many people who never had any children, by the way, okay? They never had children, and they didn't, there are even if they got married, some of them got married, some of them didn't, and some of them, even if they were married, didn't have any children, and therefore don't have any grandchildren. So for these people who have no children, no adult children, no grandchildren, some of them married, some of them unmarried, for them, their relationships, their friendships are much more important. Elderly people who spent a lifetime without a spouse, some of them never got married, right? Have a lot of friendships, activities, and social connections. For those who decide not to get married, they stay more socially active. You know, they continue dating. Just because they're not married doesn't mean they're not dating, doesn't mean they're not seeing this person or that person, having sex here and there. Doesn't mean they're not doing that. They are. They're involved, okay? They have activities, and they maintain friendships and social connections, and that's what they're like. Older adults who, you know, didn't have any children, they need at least one close companion. We all do. I know someone who's going to be one of these people. She's around my age now, and you know, she was always very good looking and still is. And she dated a lot and decided not to get married, not to have any kids. She's like me now in her 40s, and she has no plans of getting married, having any kids. If she had kids now, that would be a bad thing, okay? Remember, you're more likely to have kids with disabilities or kids who have abnormalities as you get older, as a woman, okay? But even as a man. But no, she's doesn't plan on getting married or plan on having any kids or anything like that, or settling down. She just continues to go out and meet people and hang out with friends here and there and get involved with this guy or that guy and stuff like that. And that's the way she's always been. And she's just very active socially, and she's happy with that. She lives a singles life, and there's plenty of people who decide to do that. Most people don't, but there are people who do that. And to tell you the truth, I mean, sometimes I envy her. You know, all the freedom and stuff that she has, and all the fun she has. And I can't do that. I can't just pick up and go and travel somewhere. I have to take the kids and the wife. And the kids are a pain. And the wife, I don't always get along with her. But some people are like that. And for them, their friends are even more important. They visit them, they go out with them, they hang out with them. And friends are important in general, but it's especially important for those people who never got married and those who never had any kids. Okay. The frail elderly. Now, eventually you get old enough and you're going to become frail. Okay. The important thing is that to make it so that you're not frail for too long. If you take care of yourself and you're physically and emotionally, mentally healthy, you may not have too many years where you're frail. But there are plenty of people who are frail for a long period of time of their late adulthood years. People over age 65, and often many over age 85 who are physically infirm, very ill, or cognitively disabled. There are many people, especially over age 85, who are just very frail. They can't walk, right? Mentally, they may not be all there. They may have psychological problems or physical problems or health problems, right? Some people over 65 will have those problems, those that, you know, that were unlucky and inherited something bad, you know, and they may have some disease or cancer or some illness, something like that. Or they may have bad health because they didn't take care of themselves, right? But if you get old enough, especially those over age 85, you will get there. If you live long enough, you will get to the point where you're frail, where you won't be able to move so quickly and may not be able to walk, let alone run and things like that. Most older adults become frail if they live long enough. If you live long enough, it's just going to happen to you, okay? Frailty is most common in the months preceding death. You're more likely to be frail right before you die, okay? And that's, you know, if you're going to be frail at all, that's when you want it to happen. You don't want to be frail for decades, okay? Where you're in a wheelchair or you need a scooter like that or something like that, you can't walk and you're like that for 20, 30 years. There are people like that. And sometimes it's just not their fault. Sometimes they were just in a car accident or something like that and they were injured, or maybe they are a veteran or something like that and they, you know, had a leg amputated or something like that, or they have some other problem. North Americans who live to be 95 are independent most of those years. Even those in the US that basically live a long time, even most of those will be independent and they'll find a way to take care of themselves. But there are plenty of people who are very frail. And speaking of frailty, we need to think of it in terms of, you know, what you can do. So there are these things called ADLs, the activities of daily life. These are actions that are important to independent living, typically identified as the 5 tasks of self-care. There are 5 things that you need to be able to do for yourself, for you to live independently. Otherwise, you might need to live somewhere else, in a retirement home or with your children or something like that, so they can take care of you. 5 activities of daily life are very important for independent living. And one of those is eating, right? You have to be able to feed yourself. Another one is bathing. You have to be able to bathe yourself, right? Go to the bathroom, that's toileting. Be able to dress yourself and be able to transfer yourself from your bed to your chair and back, okay? That's important. If you can't do those things, you can't really live independently. Somebody has to take care of you, okay? So the inability to perform any of these tasks is a sign of frailty, a sign that you're frail and you need somebody to take care of you. More about this, there's also the instrumental activities of daily life, IADLs. These are actions like, you know, paying the bills, driving a car, that are important to independent living, okay? And also require some intellectual competence and some forethought, okay? The ability to perform these tasks may be even more critical to self-sufficiency than the active daily activities. So these may be even more important to independent living, okay? So can you still pay bills? Can you still drive a car, right? Are you still mentally there, that you understand what's going on and you're not gonna get scammed by somebody on the internet or some door-to-door salesman coming around pretending to be selling you something and then end up robbing you or end up stealing your money, right? Being mentally competent or being able to do these things like paying bills, driving a car, things like that are maybe even more important to independent living. You have to think about all those things, right? Stay physically and mentally healthy, okay? If you want to live independently. Because remember, you might eventually end up living on your own, okay? At some point, you may lose your spouse, or maybe you go before your spouse. But if your spouse goes before you, right, then you're going to be alone for a while. And depending on how many years you live afterward. Caring for the frail elderly, how do we care for the frail elderly? There's a lot of cultural variation. Depends a lot on culture. Some cultures really believe in taking care of them, right? And them living with their children and taking care of them, right? And other cultures, more like the US, believe that they should live independently and take care of themselves and maybe go to an old age home and things like that. Okay, it just depends. Family caregivers experience substantial stress. Those who do take care of their elderly parents, it's very hard. It is very stressful, and their own health may suffer, and they risk depression, right? Especially if the person who's receiving the care, if the elderly parent they're caring for has a neurocognitive disorder, if they have something like Alzheimer's or something else, right? And they're very difficult to care for and require a lot of time around the clock, right? There are people who do that for a living and who make good money, by the way. Now imagine you having to do that and it's not even your job. It's just because it just fell on you to take care of your elderly parents or your elderly parent. Okay. And you might even have your own children. Okay. Or maybe even if you don't, your children are grown up, it's still very difficult to care for somebody like that. In the United States, the spouse is the usual caregiver. Sometimes you're caring for your own spouse, right? They've gotten sicker and are more frail than you are. You're healthier. It often falls to the woman because women usually are younger than their male spouses. Males usually marry somebody who's a little bit younger than them. And they don't live as long, by the way, as women on average. So when they get older, you as the female spouse, right, you're more likely to be taking care of him as he becomes frail. Or maybe you're taking care of your parents, they become frail. You're in your 40s and you're taking care of your frail parents. More about the frail elderly. Caregiving that results in resentment, social isolation, risk depression, poor health, and abuse. So if you're caring for someone, right, or your elderly parents are being cared for someone who resents them, someone who doesn't like them, and they're socially isolated, right, they may get depressed, your elderly parents, right, or may suffer poor health because they're not being taken care of very well, and they may even be abused. And usually we're talking about physical abuse, but there are plenty of caregivers who will beat these elderly people and abuse them. And even their own children, sometimes caring for their own elderly parents, will abuse them. It happens a lot. And often people don't know about it because they're isolated. They don't see them a lot. They're always inside the house, right? But it can happen. It can be very hard to take care of elderly people, even if they're your own parents. Elder abuse is more likely when the caregiver suffers from emotional problems or substance abuse. Hey, if the person caring for them, even if it's their own children, if that person happens to be a drug addict or a drunk or just a very difficult person, that person's more likely to abuse them. The caregiver is frail, confused, and demanding. If you're dealing with someone who's just very difficult, guess what? You get frustrated and angry, and that increases the chance of abusing them. The care location is isolated, and there's very few visitors, right? They're isolated, so the people who are taking care of them can abuse them, and nobody will know. Elder abuse is actually very, very common, okay? And it could be people who you've trusted to take care of your elderly parents or whatever it is, and somebody is abusing them, beating them, and things like that, mistreating them. You have to be aware of these things. And even when you are older, you have to be aware of these things. It can happen to anybody. Even rich people who have suffered elder abuse. They're rich and they have people who they hire to take care of them. And those people have abused them and beat them and things like that. even though these people are rich, right? It can happen to anybody, because often people are not aware, and the people who are caring for them will say, oh, he just doesn't know what's going on. He's just mentally not there, and oh, he's sleeping right now, or you need to like leave him alone, he's in bed. And they could really deny all sorts of things, keep them isolated, and you may not know, right? Especially when you're older, taking care of your own kids, and somebody's taking care of your elderly parents, right? Even if they're wealthy, if your elderly parent is not mentally all there, they can easily be physically abused and may not be able to tell you. And you may not know what's happening. It happens a lot, even to wealthy people. Long-term care. So how can you find good long-term care? Okay. A lot of people, like I said, most people prefer to age in their own homes. Some of them will live with their with their own children, right? Somebody to help them out. But what about if you end up in a nursing home or in another situation? Good nursing home care is available for those who can afford it and know what to look for. There's a lot of places out there that will take care of the elderly. A lot of nursing homes, they call them, or retirement communities and things like that. If you know what to look for, you can find some good ones. There's even some good ones here in the Antelope Valley. There's one right across the street from the college that's expensive, by the way. You want the good stuff, it's going to cost you, right? You want to live in a nice place with good amenities, people who are going to care for you and help you and all that stuff, it's going to cost you, okay? There's a lot of bad places too. But good nursing home care or good places to, good home retirement communities allow independence, right? They allow you to do what you want, right? To go and come as you please, right? Watch TV when you want, eat what you want, that kind of stuff, right? Allow people individual choice and privacy. There are some that are not so good, by the way. And it's like the elderly people living there, it's almost like they're in prison, okay? I'm serious, right? They can't do anything, and they have to follow a routine and a schedule, and it's not good. You want a place that's gonna allow you to do what you want, be independent, where you're gonna be in a place, if you do end up in a place like this, where they're gonna help you based on what you need, not just tell you what to do. These good nursing homes provide continuity of care and from well-trained staff. The staff are well-trained in how to take care of elderly people or in medical training and stuff like that. And they help you out as needed, okay? And there's different levels of care, by the way. You can be in a place where they provide a lot of care. And it's basically like an institution where they have to help you with everything. If you have parents that are that frail, or if you become that frail, and you can afford something like that, by the way. Yeah, good luck affording that. It might cost you $100,000 a year, okay? Or other places that are kind of somewhere in between, where they provide you independence, like you have an apartment there and they let you do what you want, but they just assist you with things. That's more like this, assisted living. Assisted living is a living arrangement for elderly people that combines privacy, independence, and medical supervision. I think that's what is available right there, right across the street from the college. There's this place right there that I know some faculty end up there when they get older, right? Where they can't really live on their own because they're older. And so they want to live in a place where they can be independent. They have everything that they have, but there'll be people there who will help them if they have a problem, help them, you know, for instance, take them to the doctor, you know, drive them somewhere, or remind them to take their medicine, or, you know, provide meals and things like that. The level of care that you need varies, right? You can need very little to a lot. So that's called assisted living. So it ranges from group homes. You can be group homes where there's just 3 or 4, to large apartment or town developments of hundreds of residents. The one right across the street from the college is a large one. I don't know how many, but I'm pretty sure there's at least 50 or so apartments there, you know, that are kind of assisted living, and you may live there with your spouse or on your own. And they provide the level of care that you need. You need a little bit, you need a lot. But it can be like a small place where some people have turned this into a business. They decide to basically turn their home into an assisted living space, and they'll have elderly people that they'll rent out different rooms to, and they'll provide care for those people, assuming that person, you know, has a license and knows how to care for these people. There's also village care with elderly people who live near each other. Combined, they pool their resources, stay in their homes, and also get special assistance where they need it, where they help each other out. It happens, you know, a lot in other communities around the world where people just live together and they stay there and they help each other out. They live in their own homes, but they know each other and they help each other with what's needed. It's good to have that kind of thing, right? Sometimes that exists here in the US too, where you need to, like rent a place there and live there, right? And pay to live there. And sometimes it's just something that happens, right? When you live in a good community where people take care of each other. And that's it, you guys.